On the morning of March 14th, 2024, a woman named Ellie Harmon sat in a leather chair inside an attorney's office on the 16th floor of a downtown Denver building and listened to the sound of her life being divided without her. The room smelled of lemon polish and old paper, and the particular kind of expensive cologne that men wear when they want you to know they have money. Before they opened their mouths, rain moved against the floor-to-ceiling windows in long gray sheets, and the mountains beyond the city had disappeared entirely behind clouds the color of old iron. Ellie had driven 3 hours to be here. She had worn her good coat, the navy one with the loose button on the left cuff that she kept meaning to fix, and she had ironed her blouse the night before and set her alarm for 5 in the morning because she did not want to be late. She had not been late. She had arrived 12 minutes early and sat in the lobby with a paper cup of water and her hands folded in her lap and her heart moving at a steady, deliberate pace, the way a heart does when a person has spent 3 years preparing for the worst and still cannot quite believe it is finally here. Warren was already in the conference room when she arrived. He was 45 years old and looked younger than that, with the kind of face that money keeps smooth longer than it should. He wore a suit that Ellie could not have named the price of, but understood intuitively cost more than a month of her teaching salary. He was on his phone when she walked in and didn't look up. Diane was beside him, one chair, removed her wrist, catching the overhead light with every small movement because the diamond bracelet she wore was the size of a garden and reflected everything. She smiled at Ellie when Ellie sat down, a smile that started at her mouth and went no further. Richard Kellner, the attorney, was a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses who arranged his papers with the precision of someone who has delivered difficult news so many times that precision has become a form of mercy. He cleared his throat twice before he began. He thanked them for coming. He expressed condolences that sounded genuine, though Ellie understood they were rehearsed. He explained that Raymond Harmon had been of sound mind when he drafted the final addendum to his estate plan, a point he returned to twice, and Ellie noted that both times Warren shifted in his chair. Raymond Harmon had been an engineer, not just any kind of engineer, but the particular kind that other engineers consulted when they could not solve the problem themselves. He had spent 40 years designing the internal structural systems of federal buildings, bank vaults, municipal infrastructure, the kinds of projects that never appeared in magazines but that held the daily life of cities together from the inside out. He was a precise man and a methodical one, and he had built a quiet and substantial life in Denver, and he had accumulated over the course of that life the kind of wealth that does not announce itself at parties, but that becomes very loud indeed in an attorney's conference room when it is finally sorted and divided and assigned. To Warren Harmon, Richard Kellner said, Raymond leaves the 400-acre ranch property in Boulder County, clear of any mortgage alongside the full commercial real estate portfolio currently held under Harmon Property, LLC. The estimated combined value of which is approximately $2.8 million. Warren did not smile. He adjusted the collar of his shirt and nodded once slowly, the way a man nods when he is told something he already knew. To Diane Harmon Voss, Kellner continued, Raymond leaves the entirety of his liquid assets, including the consolidated investment accounts, the family trust, and the offshore savings instruments totaling approximately $4.2 million. Diane exhaled a small sound that was almost a sigh, theatrical, in the way that sighs are when they are performed for an audience. She looked briefly at her bracelet. She did not look at Ellie. Ellie's hands were very still in her lap. She was 38 years old. She had been a high school history teacher for 11 years. Her husband, Seth, had died 19 months ago from a cardiac event that the doctors had not predicted, and that the hospital had billed for in a way that left Ellie with a debt she could not see the bottom of no matter how many extra tutoring hours she worked on weekends. She had $84 in her checking account. She had come to this meeting because her father was gone, and because she had spent 3 years of her life sleeping in a borrowed cot beside his hospital bed, and learning to administer his medications and listening to him talk at 2 in the morning about things she did not understand about heavy ground and buried foundations and the rainy day fund, about the earth remembering things that people forgot. She had given up her apartment for a cheaper one to afford his supplements. She had not taken a vacation in 4 years. She had done these things not because she expected to be rewarded, but because he was her father, and she loved him, and she had believed in the way that a person believes something. Not because it is logical, but because it must be true. Or else nothing makes sense that he would take care of her. Richard Kellner reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope, thin and plain, and slid it across the polished mahogany toward Ellie. And finally, to his youngest daughter, Eleanor May Harmon. Raymond leaves the deed to Parcel 47C, located in the municipality of Silver Plume, Clear Creek County. Ellie stared at the envelope. Parcel 47C, she said. Her voice was very quiet. The rain filled the silence around it. It is approximately 300 square feet, Kellner said. Your father acquired it in 1987 as part of a municipal tax arrangement. The current assessed value is listed at $600. Warren laughed. It was a short sound, compressed, the kind of laugh that is really a verdict. He did not try to hide it or soften it. He let it sit in the room like furniture. Diane leaned forward slightly, and there was something in her eyes that Ellie would think about later. Not cruelty exactly, but a careful and particular kind of attention, as if she were watching to see exactly how Ellie absorbed the blow. A dirt patch, Warren said. Dad bought it decades ago for some write-off. I looked it up last week. It is literally behind an old diner. Not zoned residential, not zoned commercial. It is a ditch with a deed attached. Ellie looked at the attorney. Richard, she said. I was his caretaker for 3 years. I was there every day. He told me he was going to make sure I was taken care of. He said those exact words. He said it more than once. Kellner's expression was the careful neutral of a man who has learned to feel for people without showing it professionally. Your father drafted this specific addendum in October of 2022, he said. At that time, he had full legal capacity, which was confirmed in writing by his attending physician, Dr. Patricia Morse of Denver Presbyterian. He was specific and deliberate. The language he used regarding your inheritance was as follows. Kellner put on his reading glasses and found the line on the document. Eleanor has the grit to understand the value of the ground beneath her feet. Warren said something under his breath that Ellie did not catch. Diane was looking at her bracelet again. The value of the ground, Ellie repeated. The words tasted like something gone wrong. You could always put a food truck on it, Diane offered pleasantly. Her tone was the tone of a woman saying something she considers helpful, or approach the city about a sale. I think 600 sounds about right. Ellie picked up the manila envelope. Her hands were steady. This surprised her because inside her chest, something was collapsing quietly and continuously. The way a structure fails not all at once, but floor by floor, each level pressing down on the next, until there is nothing left but the sound of settling. She stood up. She did not say anything to Warren. She did not say anything to Diane. She thanked Richard Kellner for his time with 3 words that came out flat and correct. And then she walked out of the conference room and into the elevator, and through the lobby and out through the glass doors into the March rain. And she stood on the sidewalk in her good coat and let the cold water fall on her face for a long moment before she found her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a while without starting the engine. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a person after a wound that is too large to feel all at once. Not numbness exactly. Something more specific. It is the silence of a person waiting for their own reaction. The way you wait for pain after a bad fall. Knowing it is coming, not sure yet where from. Ellie sat in that silence for 11 minutes. She counted them on the clock on her dashboard without meaning to. Then she opened the manila envelope and read the deed. Parcel 47C, Silver Plume, Colorado. 312 square feet. Acquired 1987. And then stapled behind the deed a document she had not expected. A property survey. Not an old one. Recent. The date at the top read January 31st, 2024. 43 days ago. 6 weeks before her father died. The survey had been commissioned by Harmon Property, LLC. That was Warren's company. Ellie read that twice. Warren had hired a surveyor to assess the land before the will was read. Before Raymond was even in the ground. He had wanted to know if there was anything valuable there before anyone else had the chance to look. The survey report was thorough and dismissive. The land was assessed at no commercial or agricultural value. The drainage situation was described as hazardous. The retaining wall was described as structurally compromised. But at the bottom of the last page, in smaller print under a section marked Technical Observations, was a single line that the surveyor had included, and that Warren, reading quickly for the number at the top, had apparently skipped. Unusual soil compression anomaly detected at 1 point, 5 to 2 meter depth along the western face. Source undetermined. Further subsurface investigation recommended if development is intended. Ellie folded the survey carefully and put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope in the inside pocket of her coat against her ribs. Then she started the car and drove west. Silver Plume sits at an elevation of 9,100 feet, tucked into a narrow canyon where Clear Creek runs cold and fast between walls of pine and exposed granite. In the 19th century, it was a silver mining town that produced more ore per square mile than almost anywhere else in the Colorado Rockies. The miners came and the silver came out, and then the silver was gone, and most of the miners went with it. And what was left behind was a quiet mountain town with a historic district and a population under 200. And the particular kind of stillness that belongs to places that were once important and have made their peace with no longer being so. Ellie drove up Interstate 70 and took the Silver Plume exit and found the address from the deed on a narrow gravel road that curved behind a building that had once been a diner and was now a storage facility for a plumbing contractor. She parked on the shoulder and got out and walked to the edge of the property. It was worse than Warren had described. Worse than the survey had suggested. The plot was a jagged, irregular triangle of land, 312 square feet of compacted rocky earth, on a steep grade between a chain-link fence, topped with rusted razor wire on the left side, and a concrete municipal storm drain at the bottom. Someone had been using it as a dumping ground. There was a broken microwave with its door hanging open on one side, and a stack of bald tires on the other, and a rotting oak stump in the center that had been there so long it had gone gray. The retaining wall along the drain side was made of timber that had swollen and split over years of freeze and thaw, and 2 of the main support posts had already separated from the soil and tilted outward over the concrete lip of the drain like something tired of holding on. The fence on the left side ran along the perimeter of an auto body shop, and as Ellie stood there looking at the land, a heavy-set man in coveralls came out of the shop's side door, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and watched her for a moment before crossing the lot toward the fence. "Dale Pruitt," he said. "This is my place. You looking at buying that lot? I already own it," Ellie said. "I just inherited it." Dale looked at the lot, the way a man looks at something he has given up trying to understand. "My condolences on both counts," he said. "The inheriting and the owning." He was not being cruel. He was being honest. And in her current condition, Ellie found honesty preferable to almost everything else. She asked him if he had any interest in purchasing it. Any price, even low. He shook his head without hesitating. "Lady, I would not take that liability if you paid me to take it," he said. "That slope is on a natural water channel. Every spring runoff, every big rain that ground moves. And that retaining wall is done." He pointed at the listing posts. "One good storm and the whole thing goes into that drain. When it does, the city is going to come after whoever owns it for the cleanup and the infrastructure damage. You are better off abandoning it and taking the lien." Ellie thanked him. She walked back to her car and sat down and closed the door. Her father had left her a financial trap. That was the thought that came and settled and would not move. He had left her 312 square feet of liability in a mountain town she had no connection to, and he had called it in his own handwriting the thing that a person with grit would understand the value of. She sat for a very long time. Then her phone rang. It was Warren. She let it ring. Then she called back. He did not lead with sympathy. Warren had never been a man who led with what he did not feel. "I'm going to have my attorney send you a document this week," he said. "A simple quit-claim deed. You sign it, you transfer the parcel back to the estate, and we sell it or hand it to the city and close the book on it. It is not worth the property tax, and it is certainly not worth the liability exposure." "I have not decided anything yet," Ellie said. "There is nothing to decide. That lot is a problem. It is going to cost you money. You do not have to maintain it. And more money you do not have when something goes wrong with that drainage wall. I am trying to help you." His voice was measured and reasonable, and carried the particular authority of someone who has been told his entire adult life that his opinions are worth listening to. "I appreciate that," Ellie said. "I will think about it." She hung up before he could respond. She sat looking through the windshield at the pine trees along the canyon ridge. The clouds had come in low and flat over the peaks, the kind of clouds that precede serious weather, gray and purposeful and carrying something. She thought about Seth. She thought about the night she had called him from her father's hospital room the third week of the first year, when she had been so exhausted that she could not form complete sentences when she had said to him that she was not sure she could keep doing it. And Seth had said, "You can keep doing anything if you decide it is who you are." He had said that and meant it. He had believed things absolutely with the particular confidence of a good man who does not doubt his own convictions. And she had loved him for it even when it frustrated her. He had died on a Tuesday morning. She had been at school teaching second period when her phone buzzed on her desk. By the time she got to the hospital, it was over. The hospital bill had arrived 6 weeks later, itemized over 47 pages, and the total on the last page had made her grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. She opened the center console of her car and took out the watch. It was a simple thing, a steel case on a leather band, a Seiko that Seth had worn every day for the last 8 years of his life. She had been quoted $200 for it at a consignment shop in Denver. She had the shop's business card in her glove compartment. $200 would pay one installment of the debt service, not the whole payment. One installment. She held the watch in her palm and looked at the scratched face and the worn notch on the band where Seth had always fastened it. Then she put it back in the console and started the engine. She did not go to the consignment shop. She drove home. 3 weeks passed. Her budget got tighter by the particular mathematics of a life where every small emergency costs more than the margin allows. A car repair, a medical copay, an electric bill that came in $40 higher than she had estimated, because March had been colder than February and she had kept the heat 2 degrees warmer than she should have. She was sitting at her kitchen table on a Thursday evening grading a stack of junior papers on the causes of the First World War when the certified letter arrived. She had to sign for it, which already told her something. Official correspondence that requires a signature is rarely good news. The letterhead was silver and blue. Silver Plume, Municipal Office of Code Enforcement. She read it once quickly, and then put it down and picked it up and read it again more carefully. Notice of Municipal Code Violation. Property Parcel 47C, Clear Creek County. Owner of record Eleanor M. Harmon. The letter described a severe soil erosion event along the western boundary of the property that was threatening the integrity of a municipal storm drainage channel. The load-bearing timber retaining structure on the property had partially collapsed following recent freeze-thaw cycles. Standing water and sediment displacement had been observed entering the public drainage system, constituting a violation of Clear Creek County Municipal Code sections 1482 and 1495. The property owner was required to stabilize the soil, clear the drainage pathway, and secure the compromised structure within 48 hours of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply would result in a civil penalty of $500 per day and a municipal lien filed against any assets held in the owner's name. Ellie set the letter on the table next to the stack of essays. She thought about what she could do. She could call a contractor. She had already made those calls weeks ago after talking to Dale out of a vague, worried instinct. The lowest quote she had received was $1,400 to haul debris drop gravel on the grade and install temporary erosion barriers. She had thanked the man on the phone and hung up and put the number in a folder she had labeled Silver Plume and tried not to think about it. She had $84 in her checking account. She had a credit card with a $400 limit and a $370 current balance. She could abandon the property as Dale had suggested. Let the city attach the lien and deal with it later. But a lien against her assets meant a lien against her car, the 2009 Honda she needed to get to work, and potentially complications with the refinancing she was trying to arrange on her apartment building's loan. She had spoken to a housing counselor about that refinancing. One open lien could kill it. She could call Warren and sign the quitclaim deed and walk away. She had thought about this many times in the past 3 weeks. It was the practical thing. It was possibly the sensible thing. Warren would absorb the lot into the estate, sell it, or abandon it himself. And Ellie would be free of the liability, and free of Silver Plume, and free of the whole strange, painful inheritance of a piece of land that did not seem to want to be owned. She picked up her phone. She opened her contacts. She found Warren's name and held her thumb over the call button. She looked at the letter again. The surveyor's line came back to her, the one she had read in the car the day of the will. Unusual soil compression anomaly at 1.5 to 2 meter depth. Source undetermined. She put her phone face down on the table. She sat in the kitchen for a while with the papers and the letter and the sound of the refrigerator and the particular quiet of a woman deciding who she is going to be. Then she called Jerry Hooper, the building janitor at Clearwater High, and asked if she could borrow a pickaxe. a flathead shovel, and a wheelbarrow for the weekend. Jerry was a generous man who asked no questions. She could pick them up Friday after school, he said. She thanked him. She looked up the weather for Silver Plume on her laptop. Saturday forecast severe spring storm system moving in from the northwest. Predicted rainfall in excess of 3 inches over 6 to 8 hours. Possible flash flood advisory for Clear Creek County. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she set her alarm for 4 in the morning and went to bed. She did not sleep much. She lay in the dark and thought about her father, in the way she had not allowed herself to think about him. Since the funeral, not the last years of him. Not the confused, frightened man who sometimes called her by her mother's name, and sometimes did not recognize her at all. But the earlier version, the one she had grown up with. The man who could look at a building and tell you where the load was resting without a schematic. The man who had a particular way of listening to things, not just people, but structures, pressing his hand flat against a wall or a floor, the way you might press your hand against a horse's flank to feel the animal's heartbeat. The man who used to take her to job sites on Saturdays when she was small and let her wear a hard hat that was 4 sizes too large, and who would crouch down beside her and say, "Ellie, what do you see?" She would look at whatever it was, a foundation, a poured slab, an excavation site, and she would say what she saw honestly, and without trying to impress him, because she had learned early that he always preferred honesty to performance. And he would nod slowly, and then he would say something that she would not understand for years. Something about what the ground remembered. Something about how the earth holds what has been true for a long time, longer than instruments can measure. Something about how the people who build on it need to listen first and build second. She had thought of these things as the gentle eccentricities of a man who spent too much time with structures and not enough with people. She had not understood them as instructions. She wondered now, lying in the dark, if she had missed something. If all of it, the 3 years of watching him fade, the fragmented late-night ramblings about buried things and foundations and the rainy day fund, the deed to a worthless triangle of mud, the surveyor's note about compression, anomalies, the specific words he had chosen for her inheritance. Eleanor has the grit to understand the value of the ground beneath her feet. If all of it was the same instruction given to her over and over, in the only language left to a man whose other languages were going. She did not know. She only knew that she was going to go dig in the ground in the middle of a mountain storm with borrowed tools and $84 to her name, and that this was the most Raymond Harmon thing she had ever done in her life. The alarm went off at 4. She got up in the dark and made coffee in a thermos and put on her warmest layers. She put the manila envelope in the waterproof bag she used for camping, the one with Seth's field guide to Colorado birds still in the front pocket, because she had never taken it out. She loaded the tools into the back of the Honda. She drove west on Interstate 70 while the mountains were still invisible in the pre-dawn black, marked only by the absence of stars, where their ridgelines stood against the sky. The highway was empty, and the headlights carved a tunnel through the dark, and she drove in silence without the radio, because she did not want noise. She wanted to think. She pulled off at the Silver Plume exit at 6:48 in the morning. The sky above the canyon was the color of pewter and moving. The air through the cracked window was cold and wet and smelled like ozone and pine resin, and the particular mineral sharpness that precedes serious weather in the mountains. She parked on the gravel shoulder behind the plumbing contractor's lot and got out. The land looked different in person than it had in memory. Smaller in some ways, more deteriorated in others. The retaining wall on the drain side had collapsed further since her last visit. 2 additional posts had given way, and the timber facing had buckled outward, sagging over the concrete lip of the storm channel like a broken arm. The soil behind it was already dark and saturated from overnight moisture, and even before the storm arrived, she could see the beginnings of a slow crawl of material toward the drain. She put on her yellow rain poncho. She tied her hair back. She looked at the 312 square feet of the land that was hers. Then she picked up the pickaxe, walked to the highest point of the slope, and swung. The first hour was brutal in the specific way that physical work is brutal when you are not accustomed to it. When the ground has not been broken in years and is packed hard, as cured concrete full of angular quartz stones that shatter off the axe blade and shoot into your shins. Her hands blistered on the handles by the second swing, and were screaming by the 20th, and were numb and bleeding slightly. By the time she had cleared the broken microwave to the curb and dragged the tires out to the road edge and opened a trench 18 inches long along the eastern side of the lot. At 8:23, the sky broke. It did not rain the way it rains in the lowlands. It collapsed. The water fell in a mass in a roaring curtain that hit the ground so hard it bounced. And inside of 4 minutes, the dry dust of the lot had become a slick of freezing mud. And the trench she had dug was already full and overflowing. And the slope had gone from solid ground to something that moved underfoot in a way that was deeply wrong. The temperature dropped 8 degrees in the time it took her to put her hood up. The rain plastered her poncho to her arms and filled her boots and ran down her collar. And the sound of it on the gravel and on the tin roof of the auto shop next door was like something enormous being dismantled from the inside. She screamed something into the wind. She was not sure what. She scrambled down the grade boots. Slipping, went to one knee in the mud, came back up and grabbed the shovel, and drove it into the saturated earth at the base of the slope, trying to carve a diversion channel that would redirect the runoff away from the drain. The water was faster than she was. A river of brown slurry was already running along the concrete lip, already beginning to cascade over the edge and into the storm channel below. She worked without stopping. Her shoulders had gone past pain into a dull, vast ache that was becoming background noise. She was crying, she realized, though she was not sure exactly when she had started, the tears mixing with the freezing rain on her face, until they were the same thing. She drove the shovel into the mud near the base of the western face, trying to open the channel another 6 inches. The blade hit something that was not mud and was not rock. She stopped. She hit it again 2 inches to the right. The sound came back hollow and metallic and resonant. The sound of a struck bell rather than a struck stone, and it moved through the handle and up her arms and into her chest. And she stood there in the pouring rain with the shovel in her hands and felt every hair on her body stand up at once. She crouched. She threw the shovel aside. She pressed her bare hands into the mud and dug. The cold was extraordinary. Her fingers went from pain to numbness in under a minute. She clawed through the freezing slurry, through a layer of ancient compacted clay, through a dense web of root matter that had grown through and around whatever was down there. And then her fingernails scraped across something smooth and cold and unmistakably made by human hands. She dug harder. The rain helped and fought her at the same time, washing the mud away on one side while pushing it back on the other. She was down nearly 2 feet, lying flat in the mud, with her arms buried to the elbows when she felt the shape of it. A box, large, military grade from the feel of it, heavy welded steel construction, coated in what felt like industrial grease that had hardened over decades into a thick, waxy shell. The corners were sharp and true. It had been built to last. It had been buried here a very long time. She knelt over it in the collapsing mud in the roaring mountain rain and looked at what she had found, and felt her breath leave her body entirely for 3 full seconds. Then she went to get the pickaxe. The lock was a heavy padlock, the old kind, solid steel with a hardened shackle, and it had been down in the earth long enough. that the rust had fused the mechanism into a single piece of corroded metal that would not turn and would not yield to pressure alone. Ellie wedged the sharp tip of the pickaxe under the shackle and leaned her full body weight into the handle and felt the resistance travel up through her arms and into her spine. And she held it there, trembling, the rain hammering her back, the mud shifting under her knees. Nothing. She repositioned, drove the tip deeper into the gap between the shackle and the body of the lock, leveraged again. Her right boot slipped in the mud, and she went sideways, slamming her hip hard against the steel corner of the box. And the pain was immediate and white, and she made a sound she had never heard herself make before, something between a gasp and a word that did not exist. She got back up. She repositioned the pickaxe a third time, found a different angle, put every remaining pound of force she had into the handle, and felt something deep in the metal give, not break cleanly, but fail the way old things fail when they have been holding on past their limit, with a grinding crack that she felt more than heard over the roar of the storm. The shackle snapped. The lock fell into the mud. Ellie sat back on her heels in the freezing rain and breathed. The box was exposed now. Most of it anyway, the mud still packed around the lower half and the sides. But the lid was accessible. She grabbed the edge with both hands, fingers screaming, and pulled. The hinges resisted. 50 years of compression and rust and cold ground fighting her. She pulled harder, her whole body involved in it. And then, with a sound like something that had been asleep for a very long time, finally waking, the lid gave way. She looked inside. Under a layer of degraded canvas oilcloth that had gone dark and stiff with age, she could see shapes. Rectangular, stacked in careful rows. She reached in with one hand and pulled the oilcloth back, and the rain immediately began washing the mud from the surface of what was underneath, and she watched the material emerge from the dirt. The way things emerge in dreams, slowly, and then all at once. They were wrapped in wax paper that had yellowed and begun to separate at the seams, but had held mostly the way her father had engineered things to hold, overbuilt and overprotected, and made to last past any reasonable expectation of how long they would need to last. She picked up the nearest one. It was shockingly heavy. She nearly dropped it. She had not expected that specific density. The way gold has a weight that is categorically different from the weight of other metals. A weight that communicates something about its nature before your brain has processed what it is. She tore at the wax paper. The rain helped her, working into the seams, softening the adhesion. The paper fell away in pieces, and she held the object in both hands in the gray mountain light and looked at what it was. A bar, roughly the size of a large hardcover book, the color of something older than the rain, older than the storm, older than the road and the diner and the auto shop and the town, and possibly older than most of the things she had ever held in her hands. She turned it over. She wiped the surface with her sleeve. The stamping was clear even through the grime. Block letters pressed deep into the metal. Denver Federal Reserve. Below that, a serial number she did not recognize. Below that, a year. 1973. Ellie set the bar down on the lip of the box. She did not move for several seconds. She counted the rows, 4 across, 10 deep, a second layer beneath the first. 40 bars total, possibly more if there was a third layer below. Each bar approximately 27 pounds. She did not do the full mathematics in that moment because her brain would not cooperate, but she understood in a foundational, pre-numerical way that what she was looking at was worth more money than she would make. Teaching high school history for the rest of her working life, She also understood with the same foundational certainty that it was not hers. Denver Federal Reserve, 1973. She had been 10 years old in 1973. Her father had been 34. He had been 3 years into his career as a structural engineer working for a firm called Harmon and Cassidy that had a contract with the federal government for the renovation and structural upgrade of municipal financial infrastructure in the Rocky Mountain region. She had known this the way children know things about their parents' work, abstractly as background as the reason her father sometimes came home late, and sometimes went away for weeks, and sometimes spread blueprints across the kitchen table and studied them with an expression of deep and private concentration. She had not known about the Denver Federal Reserve heist of 1973 until she was in college, when she had come across a reference to it in a criminology elective she was taking to fulfill a social science requirement. The case had been famous in a regional way, the kind of crime that generated a documentary and a chapter in books about unsolved federal thefts, and an annual revisiting in Denver news outlets around the anniversary date. $3 million in gold, taken from a vault whose alarm system and seismic sensors had been bypassed in a way that the FBI said required intimate knowledge of the vault's internal structural design. No arrests had ever been made. No gold had ever been recovered. She had read the case summary in her college textbook and thought it was interesting and moved on. She had not connected it to her father. She had not connected it to the quiet, precise man who spread blueprints on the kitchen table and pressed his palm flat against walls to feel what was in them. She was connecting it now. She was kneeling in the mud in a mountain storm with stolen federal gold in her hands. And the connection was very clear. And it was changing everything she thought she knew about her father. In a way that felt like the ground moving. The light changed. It was subtle at first, just a brightening of the rain behind her, a diffusion of the gray that could have been a break in the clouds. Then it resolved into something directional and specific, and she turned and the beam hit her full in the face, and she threw up one arm to block it. Headlights from the road above the lot. A vehicle had pulled off the shoulder and stopped engine running, and the headlights were angled down the grade directly at her in the open box. She could not see the vehicle through the glare. She could see the shape of a person stepping out of the driver's side door. The person did not hurry. They did not run for cover from the rain. They opened a large black umbrella with the ease of someone performing a familiar gesture, and then they walked to the fence at the top of the lot and stood there in the rain, looking down at her with a stillness that was more frightening than movement would have been. Ellie did not move. She was still kneeling over the box with the gold bar in her hands, and the rain crashing down around her, and the storm drain roaring below. And she looked up at the figure behind the light, and understood without knowing anything else yet, that this person had not arrived by accident. The figure came through the gate in the chain-link fence at the top of the lot, came down the slope in the rain without slipping, which told her something about the quality of their boots and the deliberateness of their movement. As they came closer, the headlight glare resolved behind them, and she could see the man more clearly. He was older, late 60s, she thought, maybe 70, heavy gray coat. The face of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions and had stopped finding them difficult. He folded the umbrella and let the rain fall on him and reached into the right pocket of his coat and took out a short-barreled revolver and held it at his side with the casual familiarity of a man who has held guns so often that holding one is no more remarkable than holding a pen. He looked at the box. He looked at the gold bar in Ellie's hands. Something moved in his face that she could not name, but that she recognized as the expression of a person who has waited a very long time for a particular moment and is now inside it. "Put it back in the box," he said. His voice was unhurried. It carried over the storm the way voices do when they have spent years learning to carry. Ellie lowered the bar back into the box. She did not stand up. Her mind was moving very fast in the specific way it moves when the situation has gone somewhere that normal thinking cannot reach. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Dennis Briggs," the man said. "Until 5 years ago, I was a senior investigative agent with the Denver field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I spent the last 30 years of my career working cold cases. Your father's case specifically for the last 12 of those 30. Ellie looked at the gun. She looked at his face. "You said until 5 years ago," she said. Briggs nodded. "Mandatory retirement. They gave me a watch and a pension that does not cover what things cost anymore, and a file cabinet full of cases that were closed because I could no longer work them." He looked at the gold again. "Your father was the most meticulous man I ever investigated. Never spent a dollar he should not have spent. Never made a mistake he should not have made. I had 30 years of nothing because of how careful he was." He took a step down the grade and the gun moved with him. "I have been watching your brother," he said, "and your sister, for months. I tapped their phones. I tracked their vehicles. I thought one of them would lead me here eventually, but they were either ignorant or very clean." He paused. "Then I watched you get that deed, a dirt patch in Silver Plume, and I knew." He had been in the car outside the attorney's office. She understood that now. He had been there that day, watching who came out with what. "You drove here yourself this morning," Ellie said. "I have been watching this lot since January," Briggs said, "waiting for one of you to come dig it up." He nodded at the storm. "I did not expect you to do it in weather like this." He almost smiled. "That is your father's stubbornness. You are not here in any official capacity," Ellie said. "I am retired. So whatever you find here, you are planning to take it for yourself." Briggs looked at her for a moment without answering, and in that moment she saw the shape of the man clearly. Not a villain in the way that word usually works. Not a man who had started out wanting to steal, but a man who had spent 30 years in service of a case that had consumed him, and had been retired out of it before it was finished, and had arrived here at the end of his working life, with a pension that fell short, and a case that was never officially closed, and a piece of information finally about where the gold was, and had made a choice that a different version of himself, the version that had not yet spent 30 years watching, would not have made. "Step away from the box," he said. "Move to the fence." Ellie looked at the ground. The mud was moving under her boots, a slow, continuous crawl toward the drain. The retaining wall to her right was groaning under the weight of the water behind it. 2 of the remaining support posts had tilted another 2 inches since she had last looked at them. She could hear the structural stress in the timber, a low, repeated popping sound that was getting more frequent. She also heard below the rain and the roar of the drain and the sound of the failing wall something else. Something that she had not consciously registered until this moment, but that she realized had been underneath everything since she had opened the box. A line from her father's late-night rambling from one of the 3 a.m. conversations she had sat through in the hospital room, because she did not know what else to do. He had said it more than once, always in the same tone, specific and calm and deliberate in a way that his other ramblings were not. He had said, "The envelope is under the bottom row, Ellie. The waterproof one. Under the bottom row." She had written it off. She had written off most of what he said in those years, because the dementia had made his speech a mixture of lucid memory and hallucination, and she had no reliable way to tell which was which. But he had said it specifically, with her name. Under the bottom row, Briggs reached the box. He crouched beside it and looked at the bars, and she could see in his profile that he was calculating, estimating, working the numbers the way a person does when they are standing in front of something. They have looked for long enough that seeing it does not feel real yet. Ellie stood up slowly. She moved toward the fence as she had been told. She took small steps in the mud, careful steps, and she moved not directly toward the fence, but at an angle a few degrees off, edging toward the lower part of the slope where the pickaxe was still standing, blade down in the earth, where she had left it after breaking the lock. 20 million, maybe more, Briggs said almost to himself. His voice different now, less controlled. At current spot price, these bars were $3 million in '73. He reached into the box with one hand. The gun was still in his other hand, but his attention had shifted the way attention shifts when a person allows themselves to be fully absorbed by what they have wanted for a very long time. Ellie said quietly and without urgency, "Do you know who actually put it there?" Briggs stopped. He looked up. She continued, still moving, slowly, still angling toward the pickaxe. "Because if you take that and leave," she said, "you will never know why Franklin Voss buried $3 million in a ditch behind a diner in Silver Plume. And that is the piece of the case you were never able to close." Briggs was completely still. The rain fell on him and the gun was at his side and his eyes were on her face, and she could see that she had found the thing, not the money. The case. 30 years of the case. "Franklin Voss," he said. "My father left a letter," she said. "In the box, under the gold. A waterproof envelope." She held his gaze. "The real story is in there. Not the version you spent 30 years working." She was at the pickaxe. She did not reach for it yet. She kept her hands still and her voice level. And she watched Briggs process the name, watched it move through him, the way a piece of information moves through a person who has been missing it for a very long time. "Franklin Voss died in 2009, Briggs said. "He did," Ellie said. "But the evidence did not." Briggs looked at the box. He looked at Ellie. He was working something through. She could see it, the tension between taking what he could carry and knowing what he still did not know. He lowered himself further toward the box, both hands now engaged, the gun resting on the lip of the steel, as he reached for the oilcloth. Ellie moved. She did not move toward Briggs. She moved down the slope 4 fast steps in the sliding mud, and she grabbed the pickaxe from the earth, and she swung it, not at the man, but at the wall. She put everything into it. Everything that remained after 3 hours of digging in a mountain storm. Everything that had accumulated over 19 months of debt and grief and teaching second period. When her phone buzzed, everything from 3 years of waking up at 2 in the morning in a hospital chair. Everything from the leather conference room and Warren's laugh and Diane's careful attention and $84 and the watch she could not sell. The axe head hit the primary support post of the retaining wall at its base. The wood was saturated. It had been failing for months. It had been holding on through nothing but the compression of the soil behind it and the friction of the remaining posts, and whatever memory the structure had of having once been sound. It did not need much. What she gave it was enough. The post did not crack so much as dissolve. At the point of impact, the integrity gone from the inside out, and the sound it made was like a rifle shot that echoed off both walls of the canyon and came back doubled. And for one suspended second, nothing moved. Then everything moved. The wall came apart in sections. The timber facing buckled outward, and the soil behind it, 300 square feet of saturated mountain earth, began to move as a single body, not crumbling but flowing a dark river of mud and rock and root matter, and 50 years of compressed debris releasing all at once down the grade toward the concrete mouth of the storm drain. Briggs shouted. The sound was sharp and full of the specific alarm of a person who has just understood that the ground is no longer a reliable surface. He came upright from the crouch beside the box, and the gun went somewhere, and his arms went out for balance, but there was no balance to be found, because the earth he was standing on was no longer earth in any functional sense. It was water with solid things in it moving faster than he could adjust. Ellie had grabbed the chain-link fence, both hands, fingers through the links, the rusted metal cutting into her palms, and she held on while the mud tore at her boots and her ankles and tried to add her to the mass of things it was carrying. She pressed her face against the fence and held on and didn't let go. Briggs went down the slope, not falling exactly, more like being absorbed, the mud taking him the way a river takes something dropped into it, carrying him through the debris field and over the concrete lip and down into the storm channel below, in a roaring brown surge that she heard and felt, but could not see from where she was pressed against the fence. Then the worst of it passed. The slope emptied. The lot became a raw crater of exposed rock and compacted subsoil, and the storm drain below roared with the weight of what had entered it. She could hear Briggs distantly cursing and shouting, which told her he was not dead, which was what she needed to know. The box was still there. It had not gone with the slide. It had come to rest against the concrete pylon at the base of the eastern face, wedged into a cradle of displaced rock and debris. The lid still open, the bars visible and dark with mud, but intact and stacked and real. Ellie released the fence. Her hands were bleeding from the links. She made her way down the raw slope on her hands and knees and reached the box and looked inside and did not touch the bars, but reached past them beneath the bottom row, her fingers searching in the cold mud that had seeped in through the disturbed edges, and she found it. A package, thick, rectangular, wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting that had been sealed with something industrial, a compound that had held for 50 years and was still holding now, even after the mudslide and the water. She pulled it free. She sat down in the mud with it in her lap, and the rain falling on her and the storm drain roaring 6 feet below, and she peeled the plastic open. Inside was a bundle of documents, photographs, a cassette tape in a small labeled case, the label written in her father's precise engineering hand. And beneath all of it, at the bottom of the bundle, a letter on her father's personal stationery, the heavy cream stock he had used for his whole professional life, written in the sharp, upright script that was his, before the disease took it. She read it. She read it twice. She read it a third time with the rain falling on it, and the ink beginning to blur at the edges of the pages, and she held the sheets carefully and read every word. Raymond Harmon had not stolen anything. In the spring of 1973, he had been 34 years old and had been awarded a federal contract to assess and upgrade the internal structural systems of the Denver Federal Reserve's primary vault. It was the largest contract of his early career. He had brought his full capability to it, had designed new load-bearing supports and a reconfigured seismic sensor array, and had delivered the completed plans to the federal project manager in March of that year. He had been proud of the work. He had told her mother about it the night he finished the drawings. She had written about it in her journal, which Ellie had found in a box in the basement after her mother died, and had read once and put away. 3 weeks after Raymond submitted the plans, a man named Franklin Voss had come to his office. Franklin Voss was at that time a 31-year-old real estate developer from Denver, with connections to organized crime that were well established in certain circles and completely unknown in others. He had come to Raymond Harmon's office on a Wednesday afternoon, and he had closed the door, and he had sat down across the desk from Raymond, and he had explained in precise and businesslike terms what he wanted. The vault plans, specifically the sensor array routing and the seismic threshold calibration data, the information that would allow a crew to move through the vault without triggering the alarm system. Raymond had refused. Franklin Voss had then explained the alternative. He had photographs, not of Raymond's wife taken in the parking lot of the grocery store she used every Thursday morning, of Warren, then 6 years old, photographed through the window of his first-grade classroom, of Diane, 4 years old, photographed in the front yard of the family home on a Tuesday afternoon while Raymond was at work. The photographs were professional. The message they communicated was professional. Voss had done this before, or he had people who had done it for him, and he knew how to make the thing he was saying land in the body of the person across the desk from him. Raymond had given him the plans. He had told no one. He had gone home that evening and sat at the kitchen table and looked at his children eating dinner and said nothing. He had continued going to work. He had finished the federal contract. He had been paid. He had received a letter of commendation from the federal project manager that he had framed and hung in his office, and that Ellie remembered looking at as a child, the gold seal at the bottom of it catching the light, not understanding that her father looked at it every day and felt something she could not have named then, but could name now. In September of 1973, a crew had entered the Denver Federal Reserve Vault. They had moved through the sensor array without triggering a single alarm. They had taken $3 million in gold. They had been gone before anyone on the floor above knew anything had happened. The investigation had lasted 30 years and closed nothing. A portion of the gold, the bars stamped with the reserve's identification markings, the hot bars that could never be fenced or melted without immediate federal attention, had been given back to Raymond by Voss, with instructions to hold them until Voss arranged for their transfer. Raymond had buried them in the only piece of land he owned that no one else knew about, a tax write-off parcel in Silver Plume that he had purchased through a blind instrument, and that appeared in no document connected to his name except the deed itself. Voss never arranged the transfer. He had moved on to other things. He had used his share of the gold to build a real estate development company that had grown into a financial institution, the Voss Family Investment Bank, which had expanded over the following decades into a substantial enterprise that his son had inherited and continued, and that now, under the name Voss Capital Group, managed assets in the mid-hundreds of millions. His son had married Diane Harmon in 2006. Raymond had kept the bars in the ground for 50 years. He had lived with what he had done and had not spoken of it and had not profited from it and had not in the end been able to go to his grave leaving no record of the truth. The letter was that record. But the letter was not finished. There was a paragraph near the end that Ellie read and then had to stop and breathe before she could read again. In September of 2019, Raymond wrote while going through the estate of her father-in-law. Following the senior Voss's death, Diane had found a set of documents, wire transfer records, signed affidavits in Voss's own hand describing the 1973 operation. A ledger connecting the original heist proceeds to the founding capital of what became Voss Capital Group, and a letter from Voss to Raymond from 1974, the year after the heist that made Raymond's role in his coercion explicit. Diane had brought these documents to Warren. They had discussed what to do with them for 3 months. The conclusion they had reached was the conclusion of people who have something to lose from the truth and nothing to gain from it. They had kept the documents. They had said nothing. And when Raymond had begun to show signs of cognitive decline, and it became clear that the question of the estate would eventually arise, they had taken a particular interest in the Silver Plume parcel and had commissioned the survey that Warren thought had closed the question. It had not closed it. It had found the anomaly and noted it, and Warren had not read far enough to see the note, because Warren had been looking for a simple numerical answer and had found one and stopped reading. Raymond had known about Diane's discovery. He had written that he was not certain how he knew, only that in one of the last periods of sustained clarity before the disease took the final things he had been certain of it. He had drafted the addendum to his will. He had arranged for the mineral rights. He had left the letter in the box where only a person willing to do the work in the worst possible conditions would ever find it. Because that was, he wrote, the only kind of person he trusted to do what needed to be done with it. Ellie, the letter concluded, the gold belongs to the government. I am not asking you to keep it. I am asking you to understand why it is there and what it means, and to take the documents in this package to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and let the truth finish what I was too afraid to start. I was a coward in the most important moment of my life. You have never been a coward in any moment of yours that I witnessed. I'm sorry for the years you spent watching me disappear. I'm sorry I could not tell you what I am telling you now, while I still had the words to say it properly. The ground remembers, Ellie. That is what I used to tell you on those Saturdays. The ground holds what has been true for a long time. I buried the truth here because it was the only place I trusted to keep it. I knew you would find it. I knew it would be you. Ellie sat in the mud in the collapsing rain with her father's letter in her hands and the storm drain roaring below her, and Briggs somewhere in the channel below, cursing steadily through the mud. And she did not move for a while. She thought about her father crouching beside her at job sites when she was small, letting her wear the hard hat that was too big for her head, asking her what she saw. She thought about the way he used to press his hand flat against walls and floors, and the earth itself not listening, exactly more like waiting the way you wait for something to confirm what you already understand is true. She thought about Seth, about the way he used to say that you can keep doing anything if you decide it is who you are. She thought about Warren's laugh in the attorney's conference room, short and compressed, the laugh that was a verdict. She thought about Diane's careful attention, the eyes that were watching to see exactly how the wound landed. She thought about the 40 bars of gold in the box beside her, and the documents in her hands, and what all of it added up to, and what it required of her now. Above her on the road, she could see the red and blue of emergency lights coming through the rain. Dale Pruitt must have heard the shot when the retaining wall failed, or heard Briggs in the drain, or both. Someone had called. The lights multiplied, 2 vehicles, then 3, and she could hear the doors and the radio traffic and the boots on the gravel, and then the flashlight beams sweeping down the slope toward her. She folded her father's letter carefully and pressed it flat against her chest. She placed it with the rest of the documents inside the waterproof plastic. She held the package in both hands against her body, tight, the way you hold something you have waited a long time to carry. Then she stood up in the mud and the rain and turned toward the lights and raised her hands steady. Both of them, the waterproof package sealed against her chest by the pressure of her arm. There were 4 officers at the top of the crater. They had their weapons out and their lights on her, and their voices were loud and official, and very far from everything that had just happened in this small triangle of ground on a mountain in Colorado in the rain. Ellie looked up at them. "My name is Eleanor Harmon," she said, and her voice was clear and did not shake. "I need you to contact the Denver field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. I have recovered property belonging to the United States government, and I have documentary evidence of a financial conspiracy that has been active for 50 years. She waited. Below her in the drain, Briggs had stopped cursing. The rain was beginning to ease fractionally, the edges of the storm starting to pull back from the canyon walls. In the quiet that opened in the storm's margin, she could hear for the first time since morning the creek running cold and fast at the bottom of the canyon, doing what creeks do, moving downhill, carrying what it carries, indifferent to everything except the pull of the ground beneath it. The first federal agent arrived in Silver Plume at 11:47 that Saturday morning. He came in an unmarked dark sedan that parked behind the 3 county cruisers already on the shoulder, and he got out wearing a jacket with FBI in yellow letters across the back and walked to the edge of the crater and stood there for a long moment, looking at what remained of Parcel 47C before he looked at Ellie. His name was Agent Carl Whitmore. He was 51 years old and had a face that had learned to receive information without reacting to it. He listened to Ellie for 6 minutes without interrupting, which she would later think of as the first sign that she was being taken seriously. She had been wrapped in a foil emergency blanket by one of the county deputies and was sitting in the back of a cruiser with the door open and her boots off because they were full of water. And she told Whitmore what had happened in the order it had happened, starting with the will and ending with the box, and she handed him the waterproof package while she talked and watched him go through the contents with the careful, deliberate hands of a person who understands what he is looking at. When she finished, he looked up from the documents. "You said your father mentioned a cassette tape," he said. "It is in the package," Ellie said. "The labeled one." His handwriting on the label. Whitmore found it. He held it up and read the label without speaking. Then he placed it back in the package with a precision that communicated something about how seriously he was treating everything in his hands. "Dennis Briggs," he said. "Retired out of our Denver office." "Yes," Ellie said. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. He looked down the road to where Briggs was being extracted from the storm drain by 2 county deputies and a fire crew covered in mud from the shoulders. Down his gray coat destroyed his face, carrying the specific expression of a man processing the distance between where he thought he would be this morning and where he actually is. "He is going to need medical attention," Whitmore said. "He had a gun," Ellie said. "It went into the slide with him." "We will find it," Whitmore said. He closed the waterproof package and held it carefully with both hands and looked at Ellie with the measured directness of a federal agent who has just been handed something significant and knows it. "Ms. Harmon," he said, "I need you to come with me to the Denver field office this afternoon. There are people there who need to hear everything you just told me. And there are people there who are going to want to look at these documents under better conditions than a muddy road in a rainstorm." "I know," Ellie said. "This is going to take time," he said. "I want to be honest with you about that. What you have given me, if it is what it appears to be, is the opening of an investigation that is going to be substantial and complex and is not going to be resolved quickly." "How long?" she said. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "A year," he said. "Possibly 2. Possibly more, depending on what the documents establish and how the subjects respond." Ellie thought about her $84. She thought about the lien notice. She thought about the $1,400 contractor quote and the credit card with $30 of available credit left on it, and the refinancing application that was sitting in a housing counselor's inbox, waiting for a clear title on her apartment. She thought about all of that, and then she put it in a room in her mind and closed the door on it and said, "All right." She put her wet boots back on and got in Whitmore's sedan, and they drove down the canyon toward Denver, while the storm finished itself out above the mountains and the creek ran high and brown below the highway. and the sky began incrementally to clear. The Denver FBI field office was a building that looked from the outside like it could be anything. A mid-tier insurance company, a regional medical group, something functional and deliberately unremarkable. Inside it was all badge readers and fluorescent light, and the particular institutional smell of a place where serious work is done at all hours without ceremony. Whitmore brought her to a conference room on the 3rd floor, and a woman named Agent Sandra Reeve came in and set a cup of coffee in front of Ellie without being asked, and sat across from her, and the two of them, Whitmore and Reeve, took Ellie through everything again from the beginning. This time it took 3 hours. There were other people in and out of the room during those 3 hours. A man from the Financial Crimes Division who asked specific questions about Voss Capital Group and wrote the answers in a notebook with a mechanical precision that reminded her of her father. A woman from the district attorney's office who arrived at hour 2 and listened without speaking for 40 minutes, and then asked 2 questions and left. A forensic document specialist who took the contents of the waterproof package away to another room and came back an hour later and said something quietly to Whitmore that Ellie could not hear. And Whitmore nodded once with an expression that was professionally neutral, but that contained, she thought, something underneath the neutrality. At 6 in the evening, Whitmore came back to the room where Ellie was sitting with a 3rd cup of coffee that had gone cold, and told her she could go home. She looked at him. "The documents are authentic," he said. "That is preliminary, but the specialist is confident. The cassette tape is going to require equipment we do not have here tonight, but we will have it by Monday." He paused. "Ms. Harmon, I want you to know that we are taking this seriously. The name Franklin Voss and Voss Capital Group is not unknown to this office. There have been inquiries over the years that did not go anywhere for lack of evidence. What you have brought us today is a significant development." Ellie thought about Diane in the conference room at the attorney's office, looking at her bracelet. She thought about Warren adjusting his collar. She thought about the two of them sitting in some room in some building right now, in their good clothes with their clean hands, not knowing. "What happens to them?" she said. "Warren and Diane." "That depends on what the investigation establishes," Whitmore said. "If the documents support what your father's letter describes, if Warren had knowledge of the Voss connection and actively participated in concealing it, he is looking at federal charges: money laundering, conspiracy obstruction. Diane potentially more, depending on what the documents from the Voss estate reveal about her specific knowledge and actions." He looked at her steadily. "I cannot make you promises about outcomes," he said, "but I can tell you that the Federal Whistleblower Reward Act applies to this situation. If the investigation leads to the recovery of federal assets and the prosecution of financial crimes connected to those assets, you are entitled to a reward of up to 15% of the total value recovered and fines levied. That determination is made by the Department of Justice at the conclusion of the proceedings." Ellie absorbed this. 2 years, she said. "Possibly," he said. She nodded. She picked up her cold coffee and finished it. She thanked Whitmore and Reeve and the man from Financial Crimes who was still at his desk in the hallway making notes, and she walked out of the FBI field office into the Denver evening, which was cold and clear. Now the storm gone, the mountains visible again in the last of the daylight, the snow line bright above the city. She sat in her car in the parking garage for a few minutes. She was exhausted in a way that went past physical, past the aching shoulders and the blistered hands and the bruised hip and the hours of cold and wet, into something deeper. A tiredness of the self that comes from a day in which everything that was true in the morning is different by evening. She took Seth's watch out of the center console. She held it in her palm. The leather band was soft from years of wear, and the steel case was warm from the car's heat, and the face showed 6:42. which was correct because Seth had always kept it accurate. Never let it run slow. Said that a man who lets his watch run slow has already decided to be late. She put it on her wrist. She had not worn it before. She had carried it for 19 months. But she had not worn it as if wearing it was a decision she was not ready to make. She fastened it at the notch Seth always used and held her wrist up and looked at it in the dim light of the parking garage. Then she started the car and drove home. The months that followed were not like anything she had a template for. The investigation moved the way federal investigations move, which is to say it moved with the relentless, systematic patience of a very large institution that does not hurry because it does not have to, because the law does not expire on the schedule of the people waiting for it. Whitmore called her every 3 to 4 weeks with updates that were substantive but carefully measured, giving her what she needed to understand the progress without giving her more than she was authorized to know. The cassette tape, when they played it, was a recording of a conversation between Raymond Harmon and Franklin Voss from the spring of 1973. Raymond had recorded it on a device he had concealed in his desk during the meeting. The audio quality was imperfect, muffled in places degraded by 50 years of magnetic decay, but the forensic audio team in the Washington field office had processed it and recovered enough to be usable. Voss's voice was on the tape. The nature of the conversation was on the tape. The photographs of Raymond's family and the explicit threat that accompanied them were described in detail on the tape in Voss's own voice, in the particular businesslike tone of a man who has made this kind of offer before. Raymond had pressed record and then sat across the desk from a man threatening his children, and had not let his hands shake visibly, and had kept the man talking long enough to get what he needed onto the tape, and then had buried the tape in a waterproof case in a box in the ground in Silver Plume, and had waited for 50 years for someone with enough grit to dig it up. The wire transfer records in the waterproof package traced a line from a series of anonymous accounts opened in the fall of 1973, directly to the founding capital deposits of what became Voss Capital Group. The forensic accountants at the FBI worked backward through 50 years of restructured entities and renamed instruments and layered holding companies and found the line every time. Voss had been meticulous, but he had not been meticulous enough to erase a trail that started from a specific federal theft event with a specific documented value, and the mathematics of where the money had gone were ultimately not a matter of interpretation. The signed affidavits from Voss's private papers, the ones Diane had found in 2019, were in Raymond's waterproof package because Raymond had obtained copies through means that Whitmore told Ellie he was not going to ask about, and that she understood to mean her father had been paying attention to Voss Capital Group for a very long time and had found a way to get what he needed before the disease took his remaining capacity to act. Diane was arrested on a Thursday morning in October, 14 months after the day in Silver Plume. Ellie was at school teaching second period when her phone buzzed on the corner of her desk. She was talking about the Missouri Compromise, and she saw Whitmore's name on the screen, and she set the phone face down and finished the class, and then went to the hallway and called him back. "We executed the arrest warrants this morning," Whitmore said. Diane Harmon Voss on 2 counts of concealing evidence of a federal crime and 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. Warren Harmon on 3 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of conspiracy, and 1 count of structuring. The Boulder Ranch and the commercial portfolio are under federal seizure pending asset forfeiture proceedings. The Voss Capital Group offices in Denver and Chicago were raided simultaneously this morning. We have been coordinating this with the Financial Crimes Division for 8 months. Ellie stood in the hallway of Clearwater High School with the phone against her ear, and students moving past her between classes, and the particular noise of a school at passing time surrounding her. and she did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel triumphant, and she did not. She felt something quieter and more complicated than that, something that did not have a clean name, a mixture of exhaustion and grief, and a remote, careful satisfaction that was less about winning than about a long, wrong thing finally being addressed. She felt more than anything that her father had been heard. "Are the documents from our case sufficient?" she asked. "Without the Voss estate papers that Diane had." "We do not need the Voss estate papers," Whitmore said. "The tape and the wire transfers and your father's letter are sufficient for the charges we have brought. The Voss estate papers are corroborating evidence. They strengthen the conspiracy counts against Diane considerably." "What about Briggs?" she said. "Dennis Briggs was arraigned in April," Whitmore said. "Attempted armed robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful discharge of a firearm. He pled not guilty. Trial is set for February." Ellie thought about the man who had spent 30 years working a case and had arrived at the end of his working life with a pension that did not cover what things cost anymore. She thought about the version of him that had started 30 years ago, with a belief that the truth was worth pursuing. She thought about the distance between that version and the man who had stood in the rain with a gun, and she thought it was the saddest distance she had encountered in the whole long story. "He needed the money," she said. "Yes," Whitmore said. "That does not change what he did." "No," Ellie said. "It does not." She went back to class. She taught the rest of the day. She drove home and made dinner and paid 2 bills online and graded a set of papers on the causes of the First World War, which her juniors always struggled with because causation across decades is a difficult concept. The idea that something done in one era can structure everything that follows in ways that are invisible until they are not. The next 18 months moved the way time moves when a person has decided to live inside it rather than wait for it to end. Ellie taught her classes. She tutored on weekends. She worked with a housing counselor on the refinancing and got it done finally 4 months after the arrests, when the title was clear and the lien question was resolved. The refinancing reduced her monthly payment by $230, which was not a fortune but was the difference between a budget that worked and one that did not. She hired a lawyer. This was the thing Whitmore had not told her to do, but that she understood was necessary. A lawyer who specialized in federal whistleblower cases and who charged a fee she paid in installments, and who turned out to be the single most useful decision she made in the entire process. The lawyer's name was Patricia Fenwick, and she was 58 years old and had the specific competence of a person who has spent decades arguing with federal agencies on behalf of people the agencies would prefer to underpay and under-acknowledge. "The Department of Justice does not simply write checks," Patricia told her at their first meeting. "They calculate, they dispute, they negotiate, they delay. That is not corruption, that is bureaucracy, which is in some ways more frustrating because there is no malice to push back against. There is only process." "Then we work the process," Ellie said. Patricia smiled the smile of someone recognizing a useful quality in another person. "That is exactly the correct attitude," she said. They worked the process for 14 months. Patricia filed the initial whistleblower claim within 30 days of the arrests, which established Ellie's position in the queue. She documented the chain of custody for every piece of evidence Ellie had recovered. She prepared a detailed accounting of the federal assets recovered and the financial crimes established, working with the FBI Financial Crimes Division to arrive at a total that was defensible and accurate. She argued in 3 separate written submissions and 2 in-person meetings with DOJ attorneys that Ellie's role was not incidental but foundational, that without her specific actions on that specific Saturday in Silver Plume, the evidence would have remained buried indefinitely. The DOJ attorneys, to their credit, did not dispute the foundational claim. They disputed the percentage. There was a period of several months in which the number went back and forth in a way that Patricia described as normal, and that Ellie experienced as exhausting. And then there was a period in which it stopped moving, and Patricia told her that they had reached a number that was fair, and that she recommended accepting. Ellie sat in Patricia's office on a Tuesday afternoon in March, almost exactly 2 years after the reading of the will, and looked at the number on the document in front of her. $14.2 million, net of Patricia's fees, which were substantial, and which Ellie paid without complaint, because they were entirely earned. The number was still a figure that Ellie could not hold in her mind as a real thing. She had spent 2 years living on a teacher's salary and tutoring income and a refinanced mortgage payment, and the number on the document belonged to a different scale of reality than the one she had been operating in. "This is clean money," Patricia said. "Federal whistleblower reward, fully documented, fully legitimate. No tax complications beyond standard income reporting, which we will handle correctly." She looked at Ellie over her reading glasses. "You can do whatever you want with it." Ellie looked at the document. She thought about Seth. She thought about the hospital bill that was now paid, had been paid 8 months ago, when a portion of her tutoring savings and a small settlement from the hospital's billing department had finally cleared the last of it. She had paid it off on a Wednesday morning before school, and had sat in her car in the school parking lot for a few minutes afterward, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the fact of it being done. She thought about her father pressing his palm flat against the earth on a job site in 1989, crouching beside a 6-year-old girl in a hard hat, asking what she saw. She asked Patricia to hold the document for 24 hours. She drove home. She cooked dinner. She sat at the kitchen table where she had sat the night the certified letter arrived from Silver Plume Municipal Code Enforcement. The same table, the same chair. And she thought about what she was going to do. In the morning, she called Patricia and signed. There were things she did with the money and things she did not do. She paid off the apartment mortgage entirely, and then sold the apartment and bought a house in a neighborhood in Denver that had good light in the mornings and a yard with 2 large cottonwood trees that moved in the wind with a sound she found peaceful. She kept teaching. This surprised people when she told them people who assumed that the natural consequence of sudden financial security was the abandonment of the ordinary life that preceded it. But she had thought about it carefully and had concluded that she was a person who taught because she was a teacher, not because she needed the income, and that those were different things, and the second one did not cancel the first. She established a scholarship fund at Clearwater High in Seth's name for students in financial need pursuing post-secondary education. She funded it with an amount that would sustain it independently for decades. The first year it awarded 4 scholarships. The second year 6. She attended the award ceremony both years and did not make a speech, but shook each student's hand and looked them in the eye the way Seth had looked people in the eye directly and without hedging, as if the person in front of him was worth the full attention of a good man. She thought about the mineral rights. The 40 MAU acres of subsurface rights in Clear Creek County, registered in her name, were still there. Raymond had purchased them in 2014 through a process that was entirely legal and entirely invisible to everyone who had not been looking for them. Whitmore's team had found them in the course of the investigation and confirmed their legitimacy and returned the documentation to Ellie through Patricia. At the conclusion of the federal proceedings, a geological survey company had been in contact. Silver Plume's mining history was not finished, they said. The deep rock formations under the old district contained deposits that the 19th century equipment had not been able to reach. Modern extraction methods were different. They were interested in a conversation. Ellie had the conversation. She listened carefully and asked questions and took notes, and told them she would think about it, and called Patricia. And then a mining attorney Patricia recommended, and then sat with the information for 2 months before making a decision. The decision she made was not the one the survey company had hoped for, but it was the one that was consistent with who she was. She agreed to a limited assessment agreement. No extraction, no development. A careful scientific survey only with full rights to terminate at any juncture and full ownership of the geological data produced. The company agreed because partial access was better than none, and because Ellie's attorney had made the terms clear and unambiguous, and there was no room in the agreement for anything she had not explicitly authorized. She did not know yet what she would do with the mineral rights in the long run. She had decided that she did not need to know yet. Her father had held the land for 50 years. She could afford to think carefully. Warren's trial lasted 11 days. Ellie did not attend. She followed the coverage in the Denver newspaper and in 2 national outlets that picked it up as a financial crime story. And she read the summaries Patricia sent her after each day of testimony. On the 7th day, a former executive from Voss Capital Group testified about a meeting in 2011 in which Warren had been explicitly briefed on the historical origin of a portion of the firm's founding capital. The executive had taken notes at the meeting. The notes had been preserved. Warren's attorney objected to their admission, and the objection was overruled. On the 11th day, the jury deliberated for 4 hours and returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. Warren was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. The Boulder Ranch was sold at federal auction. The commercial real estate portfolio was liquidated, and the proceeds directed to the Federal Asset Recovery Fund. Everything Warren Harmon had accumulated in his 45 years of careful, self-interested accumulation was gone in the specific, clean way that federal forfeiture removes things not dramatically, not with fanfare, but completely with the thoroughness of a process that does not leave remainders. Diane entered a plea agreement before her trial. She received 5 years probation, substantial fines, and a requirement to cooperate fully with the ongoing Voss Capital Group investigation, which was a separate proceeding that involved federal prosecutors in 3 states and was going to continue for years. The Voss family money, the money that had bought the diamond bracelet and the winters in Aspen and the tailored suits, was gone before the plea was entered. The asset forfeiture had moved faster than the criminal proceedings, because it always does, because money is easier to take than freedom. And the federal government is efficient when efficiency serves it. Ellie heard about Diane's plea from Patricia on a Wednesday afternoon. She was in her car in the school parking lot after the last bell, and Patricia called and told her the terms, and Ellie listened without interrupting and said thank you, and hung up. She sat in the car for a few minutes. The cottonwood trees along the parking lot edge were moving in an April wind, and the light was the particular golden color that late afternoon in Colorado produces a light that makes everything look like it is already becoming a memory. She thought about Diane at the reading of the will, looking at her bracelet, the careful attention in her eyes, watching to see exactly how the wound landed. Ellie had thought about that a great deal in the 2 years since. She had tried to understand it not as cruelty but as fear, the specific fear of a person who has something to hide and is watching to see if the person in front of them is going to find it. She did not know if understanding it made it hurt less. She thought it probably did not. She thought understanding things and being hurt by them were not mutually exclusive, and that anyone who told you otherwise had not been hurt by very much. Dennis Briggs was convicted in February of the following year on the armed robbery and assault charges. He was sentenced to 4 years. The judge noted at sentencing that Briggs had spent 30 years in federal service and that the court recognized the complexity of a life that ends this way. But that recognition did not change what had happened on a slope in Silver Plume in a rainstorm. And the law did not provide for exceptions based on the sadness of the circumstances that preceded a crime. Ellie read the sentencing report. She thought about what Whitmore had said. He needed the money. That does not change what he did. She thought both of those things were true and would remain true simultaneously for as long as she thought about it, which she suspected would be for a long time. In June of the second year after Silver Plume, Ellie drove up Interstate 70 on a Saturday morning. Not in an emergency this time. Not with borrowed tools and $84 and a storm coming in. She drove in clear weather. The windows down the mountains visible in their full early summer condition. The snow line high, the canyon walls bright with new growth. The creek running clear and cold below the highway. She took the Silver Plume exit and drove to the narrow gravel road behind the old diner building and parked on the shoulder. The lot was unrecognizable. The mudslide had left a raw excavation that the county had subsequently graded and compacted and seeded with erosion control grass that had come in patchy but persistent. The storm drain had been repaired and reinforced with new concrete work that was bright against the older stone of the canyon. The chain-link fence along Dale Pruitt's auto shop had been replaced with a newer section that still smelled faintly of galvanizing. On the western face of the cleared ground where Ellie had dug in the rain, there was a new survey stake. Orange plastic flag on a metal rod, part of the mineral rights assessment that the Geological Survey Company had begun in the fall. They had placed 6 stakes around the perimeter of the 40-acre subsurface parcel, each one marking a point in their survey grid. Each one representing a conversation about what was in the ground that the 19th century had not been able to reach. Dale Pruitt came out of the auto shop's side door when he heard her car. He crossed the lot to the fence and looked at her with the recognition of a man who has followed a story in the news and is now looking at the person who was in the middle of it. "You're back," he said. "I wanted to see it," Ellie said. He looked at the cleared ground and the survey stakes in the repaired drain. "They do good work with that drainage," he said. "Better than what was there before." He paused. "I heard about your brother and the Voss thing." He looked at her directly. "I am sorry about your father. I did not know him, but I read about him. What he did in 73, what it cost him." "He was afraid," Ellie said. "He made a decision from fear, and then spent 50 years living with it." Dale nodded. He was quiet for a moment, the way people are quiet when they recognize that something true has been said, and adding to it would only diminish it. "What are you going to do with the mineral rights?" he said. "I do not know yet," Ellie said. "I am letting the survey finish first." "That seems right," Dale said. She stood at the fence for a while, looking at the cleared ground. The survey stake on the western face caught the morning light, and the orange flag moved in a small wind coming down from the canyon. The creek below the road was running clear, and she could hear it. The sound she had not been able to hear above the storm on that Saturday 2 years ago. The sound of water moving downhill, doing what it does, indifferent to everything except the pull of the ground. She thought about her father asking her what she saw. She thought she understood now what he had been teaching her on those Saturdays. Not to see the surface, not to assess the visible condition of things and stop there. To look for what the ground holds. To understand that what is buried does not disappear. That the earth remembers what has been put into it. And that the truth of a thing does not change because it has been covered over. It only waits patient and specific for a person with enough grit to reach down into it. She had been that person. She had not chosen to be exactly. She had been chosen by circumstance and by her father's particular faith in her, a faith he had expressed in the only language he had left. At the end, the language of deeds and documents and waterproof envelopes buried under gold in a mountain in Colorado, she had found what he left. She had done what he asked. And he had been right as he had been right about most things that mattered, that the ground holds what has been true for a long time, and that the people who build on it need to understand what is underneath before they build. She stayed at the fence for a while. She did not feel the need to say anything or do anything. She let the creek run and the flag move and the light change on the canyon walls, the way light changes in the mountains quickly and completely. One thing and then another. Nothing staying the same for very long except the stone. When she was ready, she got back in her car. She drove back down the canyon toward Denver in the clear morning, the mountains on both sides. The road following the creek. The way it always has. The way it will long after the road is gone, because the water does not need the road and has never needed it. It knows where it is going. It has always known. It follows the shape of the ground beneath it, which was shaped before anyone arrived to name it, which will hold its shape long after the names are gone. She drove with the windows down and Seth's watch on her wrist and the sound of the wind through the canyon around her. And she did not think about the money or the trial or the things that had been taken and the things that had been returned. She thought about a small girl in a too large hard hat standing beside a careful man on a construction site in the Denver sun, being asked what she saw. And she thought that the answer she would give now, after everything, was the same answer she had always given him. The answer he had always preferred because it was the only one he trusted. She would tell him exactly what was there, no more, no less. The truth of it, starting from the ground,